Elena didn't know that the man sitting alone in the corner booth of Moonshadow Cafe was the Alpha King of the Northern Territories. She didn't know he'd been tracking her scent through the city for 3 days, drawn by a pull he couldn't ignore, and she certainly didn't know that her desperate plea for a fake boyfriend was about to bind her to her fated mate forever. All she knew was that her carefully planned evening had just crumbled to dust. "I'm sorry, Elena, but I can't make it to the wedding." James's voice crackled through her phone, distorted by what sounded suspiciously like club music in the background. Something came up with work. Something came up. At 9:30 on a Friday night, Elena pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the cafe window and watched couples stroll past on the sidewalk below, their hands linked, their futures certain. Tomorrow evening she would walk into Marcus Reed's wedding reception alone. Again. Her mother would purse her lips in that particular way that said everything about Elena's failures without speaking a single word. Her sister Claire would smirk and make pointed comments about Elena's inability to keep a man interested. And Marcus. God, Marcus would look at her with that mixture of pity and smug satisfaction that had haunted her dreams for 6 months. She ended the call without saying goodbye and let her phone clatter onto the small round table. The cafe was nearly empty now, just her and the barista wiping down the counter, and the stranger in the corner who had been nursing the same cup of coffee for the past hour. Elena had noticed him the moment she'd walked in. It was impossible not to. He was the kind of man who commanded attention without trying, tall enough that his knees barely fit under the small table, with dark hair that looked like he'd run his fingers through it, and shoulders that strained against his black sweater. But it was his eyes that had made her breath catch, golden amber, like sunlight through whiskey, and so intent when they'd met hers briefly that she'd felt exposed, as if he could see straight through to the scared girl hiding beneath her carefully constructed adult facade. He was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at directly, and he was alone. The thought hit her like lightning. Desperate times called for desperate measures, and Eleanor Winters had never been more desperate in her 26 years of life. Before she could talk herself out of it, she was standing. Her hands shook as she smoothed down her simple blue dress and crossed the cafe, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor with each determined step. He looked up as she approached, and the full force of his attention made her feel dizzy. Those amber eyes seemed to see everything, her nervousness, her humiliation, the way her heart was racing beneath her ribs. "Hi," she said, and her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I have a really strange question." One dark eyebrow arched. "I'm listening." His voice was deep, with just a hint of roughness around the edges that made something flutter low in her stomach. Elena took a breath and dove in before she lost her nerve entirely. "I know this is going to sound completely insane, but I need a pretend boyfriend for tomorrow night, just for a few hours. It's my ex's wedding, and my family will be there, and I can't show up alone again. I can't." The words tumbled out in a rush. "I know we don't know each other, and I know it's ridiculous to ask a stranger, but my date just cancelled and I'm desperate and you're here and you seem nice and—" "Done." Elena blinked. "What? Done?" he repeated, and a slow smile spread across his face. It was devastating, that smile. It transformed his entire face from merely handsome to absolutely lethal. "I'll be your pretend boyfriend." Just like that. She stared at him in shock. "You don't even know my name." "Eleanor," he said softly, and her heart nearly stopped. "Your name is Eleanor." "How did you—" She shook her head, too rattled to focus on the impossibility of it. "You don't know anything about me. What if I'm crazy? What if this is some elaborate scheme?" His smile widened. "Are you crazy?" "Probably," she admitted. "Good, so am I." He stood then, and Eleanor had to tip her head back to look at him. He was even taller than she'd thought, and when he extended his hand toward her, she could see the faint scars across his knuckles, the careful way he held himself, as if he was used to controlling strength that could easily overwhelm. "Dominic," he said, "Dominic Kane." Eleanor hesitated for just a moment. This was insane. She was about to shake hands with a complete stranger and ask him to be her fake boyfriend at her ex's wedding. Her mother would have a heart attack if she knew, but Marcus would be expecting her to arrive alone and humiliated. Her family would be preparing their pointed looks and whispered comments about poor Elena who couldn't hold on to a man, and this beautiful stranger had just offered to be her shield against all of it. She reached out and took his hand. The moment their palms touched, fire shot up her arm, not the gentle warmth of attraction, but something fierce and golden and alive, like lightning striking in reverse. Elena gasped, her eyes flying wide, but Dominic's fingers tightened around hers and he didn't let go. Something in her chest pulled tight, as if an invisible thread had been drawn taut between them. The sensation was so intense, so unexpected, that Eleanor forgot how to breathe. "What was that?" she whispered. Dominic's amber eyes had darkened to molten gold, and when he looked at her now, there was something ancient and knowing in his gaze, something that made her feel small and precious and utterly seen. "That," he said quietly, his thumb brushing across her knuckles, "was the beginning." Elena wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to pull her hand away and run back to the safety of her small, predictable life. But the golden warmth spreading from where they touched was the most right thing she'd felt in months, and she found herself stepping closer instead of away. "The wedding is tomorrow at 7, she heard herself saying. "It's at the Grandview Resort, about an hour outside the city. We should probably meet beforehand to get our story straight." "Tomorrow at 5, Dominic agreed. "I'll pick you up." "You don't know where I live." That devastating smile returned. "I'll find you." And as Eleanor stood there in the quiet cafe, her hand still wrapped in his, she believed him completely. Finally, reluctantly, she pulled away. The loss of contact made her feel cold, as if she'd stepped out of sunlight into shadow. "Thank you," she said. "I know this is weird, but thank you." "Elena." He said her name like it was something precious. "I should be thanking you." She didn't understand what he meant, but the way he looked at her, as if she was exactly what he'd been searching for, made her feel brave in a way she hadn't in years. Elena gathered her purse and headed for the door, but she could feel his eyes on her until she stepped out into the cool night air. Only then did she realize she was smiling. Tomorrow she would walk into Marcus Reed's wedding on the arm of the most beautiful man she'd ever seen. For the first time in 6 months, Eleanor Winters was going to hold her head high. She had no idea her pretend boyfriend was about to change everything. Dominic arrived at 5 o'clock exactly, and Eleanor had spent the better part of the day wondering if she'd imagined the entire encounter. She hadn't. He stood at her apartment door in a charcoal grey suit that had clearly been tailored specifically for his body, holding a single white rose and looking like he'd stepped out of some impossible fantasy. The golden warmth she'd felt the night before hummed to life the moment she saw him, settling somewhere behind her sternum like a second heartbeat. "You look beautiful," he said, and the way his amber eyes swept over her simple black dress made her feel like she was wearing diamonds. "Thank you." Eleanor accepted the rose, her fingers brushing his. Even that brief contact sent sparks racing up her arm. "You didn't have to. We need to go shopping," Dominic interrupted gently. "That dress is lovely, but not for where we're going." Elena blinked. "Shopping? Dominic, I can't afford—" "I can." He said it so simply, as if money was something that had never been a concern. "Trust me." The word hung between them. Trust. Such a small thing to ask, and yet Eleanor hadn't truly trusted anyone in years. Not since Marcus. Not since her family had made it clear that her happiness was less important than their reputation. But something about the way Dominic looked at her, patient and sure and utterly focused, made her want to try. okay?" she whispered. 20 minutes later, Elena stood in the most exclusive boutique she'd ever seen, watching sales assistants flutter around Dominic like he was royalty, which, she was beginning to suspect, he might actually be. "Mr. Kane," the manager breathed, appearing as if from thin air, "such an honour to have you back. How may we serve you today?" "My companion needs something appropriate for the Grandview Resort," Dominic said, his hand settling possessively on the small of Elena's back. "Tonight." Elena tried not to shiver at his touch. "Dominic, this is too much. I can't let you." "You can," he said quietly, leaning close enough that his breath warmed her ear. "You will." The next hour passed in a blur of silk and satin, of assistants holding up gowns that cost more than Elena made in 3 months. She felt like Cinderella, if Cinderella had been terrified that her fairy godmother was too good to be true. Finally, Dominic selected a midnight blue dress that seemed to be made of starlight, with delicate beading that caught the light with every movement. When Elena emerged from the dressing room wearing it, the entire boutique fell silent. "Perfect," Dominic said, and his voice was rougher than before. "Absolutely perfect." Elena stared at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. The dress transformed her from ordinary to extraordinary, and when she met Dominic's eyes in the reflection, she saw something there that made her knees weak. Hunger. "Dominic," she started, but he was already turning to the manager. "We'll take it," he said, "and shoes, jewellery, whatever she needs." The manager nodded eagerly, but Elena caught Dominic's arm. "You can't just buy me a whole wardrobe. This is supposed to be pretend, remember?" Something flickered across his face, too quick for her to catch. "Is it?" Before she could ask what he meant, his phone rang. Elena watched his expression shift as he glanced at the screen. "I need to take this," he said, stepping away. "Yes?" Elena couldn't make out the words, but she caught the tone of the voice on the other end. Deferential, respectful in a way that spoke of hierarchy and power. "Your Majesty," she heard clearly, and her blood went cold. Dominic's eyes met hers across the boutique. For a moment neither of them moved. Then he was ending the call and crossing back to her, his face carefully neutral. "Elena." "Your Majesty?" The words came out as a whisper. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his amber eyes. "Some things are complicated to explain. Try me." Dominic was quiet for a long moment, and Elena could feel the weight of the secret hanging between them. Whatever he was about to tell her would change everything. She could see it in the careful way he held himself, in the tension around his eyes. "I'm not just Dominic Kane," he said finally. "I'm Dominic Kane, Alpha King of the Northern Territories." Elena stared at him. Alpha King. The words should have sounded ridiculous, like something out of a fantasy novel. But looking at Dominic now, at the way he commanded attention without trying, at the deference of everyone around him, at the careful control he maintained over what was clearly immense strength, they fit perfectly. "You're—" She swallowed hard. "You're an Alpha King, and you agreed to be my fake boyfriend." "Yes." "Why?" The question hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Dominic's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with infinite gentleness. "Because," he said quietly, "you asked." It wasn't the whole truth. Eleanor could see that in his eyes, could feel it in the golden thread that seemed to pulse between them whenever he touched her. But it was truth enough for now. "We should go," she said. "The wedding starts soon." Dominic nodded, but he didn't step back. Instead, he leaned closer until his forehead almost touched hers. "Elena," he said, his voice so low it was almost a growl. "Tonight, when people look at us, they're going to see something real. Are you ready for that?" No, Elena thought. She wasn't ready for any of this. She wasn't ready for the way her heart raced when he looked at her, or the way her body seemed to come alive under his touch. She wasn't ready for an Alpha King who treated her like she was precious, or for the growing suspicion that her pretend boyfriend was becoming something far more dangerous. But Marcus would be waiting, her family would be watching, and this beautiful, impossible man was offering to stand by her side. Yes, she lied. The drive to Grandview Resort took exactly 1 hour, during which Eleanor learned 3 things about Dominic Kane. First, he drove like he did everything else, with complete confidence and barely leashed power. Second, he had been disappointed before by people who should have protected him, though he didn't elaborate on the details. And third, when he looked at her, she felt like the most important person in the world. "Tell me about Marcus," Dominic said as they pulled into the resort's circular drive. Eleanor's stomach twisted. "What do you want to know?" "Why you loved him." The question caught her off guard. I thought I loved him. He was safe, predictable. He never asked for more than I was ready to give." She paused. "I should have realized that was the problem." "He hurt you." It wasn't a question. Dominic's voice had gone deadly quiet, and Elena felt a shiver run down her spine that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the sudden, overwhelming certainty that Dominic Kane would never let anyone hurt her again. "He left me for my best friend," she said simply. 6 months ago. They're getting married tonight." Dominic's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "And your family?" "We'll spend the evening pointing out all the ways I failed to keep him." Elena straightened her shoulders. "But not tonight. Tonight I have you." Dominic turned in his seat to face her fully. In the soft light of the resort's entrance, his amber eyes seemed to glow. "Elena," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a promise. "You didn't fail to keep him. He failed to deserve you." Before she could respond, he was getting out of the car and walking around to open her door. When he offered his hand to help her out, Eleanor took it without hesitation. The moment their skin touched, that golden fire sparked between them again. But this time, Eleanor didn't pull away. This time, she let the warmth spread through her chest and settle somewhere deep, in a place that had been cold for too long. "Ready?" Dominic asked. Elena looked up at the resort's grand entrance, at the soft glow of lights spilling from the windows, at the life she was about to walk back into with an Alpha King by her side. "Ready," she said, and meant it. They walked through the doors together, and Elena felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. The scared girl who had approached a stranger in a coffee shop was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew she was worth protecting. The question was whether she was brave enough to believe it. The Grandview Resort's lobby was everything Elena remembered from Marcus's proposal 6 months ago, all marble columns and crystal chandeliers, and the kind of understated elegance that whispered money. But this time she wasn't trailing behind Marcus in a borrowed dress, hoping she looked like she belonged. This time she walked through those gleaming doors on the arm of an Alpha King. The difference was immediate and impossible to ignore. Conversations paused mid-sentence as they passed. Heads turned. The concierge straightened behind his marble desk, and Eleanor caught the exact moment recognition flickered across his face. "Mr. Kane!" the man breathed, practically materializing in front of them. "What an unexpected honour! If we had known you were attending this evening's event, we would have prepared—" "That won't be necessary," Dominic said smoothly. "We have a reservation. Winters." Elena blinked. She hadn't made a reservation. Her plan had been to drive up for the ceremony and leave immediately after, before anyone could corner her for awkward conversations about her life choices. "Of course," the concierge said, fingers flying across his computer. "The presidential suite has been prepared and is ready for your arrival." "Presidential suite?" Eleanor whispered as they walked toward the elevators. "Dominic, I booked a standard room. I can't afford—" "You didn't book anything," he said quietly, his hand settling on the small of her back with possessive ease. "I did." The elevator doors opened, and Eleanor found herself whisked up to the top floor before she could process what was happening. The suite that awaited them was larger than her entire apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the resort's gardens and a sitting area that could have hosted a dinner party. "This is too much," Elena said, turning to face him. "Dominic, I asked you to be my fake boyfriend for a few hours. You don't need to buy me dresses and jewellery and presidential suites. This isn't real." Something dangerous flickered in his amber eyes. "Isn't it?" Before Elena could ask what he meant, a sharp knock interrupted them. Dominic's expression shifted, his body going tense in a way that made Elena's instincts prickle with warning. "Elena, are you in there?" Her mother's voice. "Of course." Elena opened the door to find Margaret Winters standing in the hallway with her sister Claire, both dressed in their finest passive-aggressive armour. Her mother's gaze swept over Elena's midnight blue dress and diamond earrings with the kind of calculating assessment that had made Elena feel small her entire life. "Well," Margaret said, pushing past Elena into the suite, "I suppose you did manage to find someone after all, though really, Elena, borrowing clothes and jewellery for one night is rather—" She stopped mid-sentence as Dominic emerged from the bedroom area, straightening his cufflinks with the kind of casual grace that spoke of old money and older power. In the soft light of the suite, he looked like something out of a fairy tale, devastatingly handsome and utterly untouchable. Margaret's mouth fell open. "Mother," Elena said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Claire, this is Dominic Kane. Dominic, my mother Margaret and my sister Claire." Dominic stepped forward and offered a smile that was polite and distant, and somehow managed to convey exactly how little he thought of women who made their daughters feel worthless. "Mrs. Winters," he said, taking Margaret's hand briefly. "Claire, Elena has told me so much about you." The way he said it made it sound like a threat. Claire recovered first, as she always did. Elena's older sister had perfected the art of social climbing, and she recognised opportunity when she saw it. "Dominic Kane," she repeated, her eyes sharp with calculation. "Have we met? You look familiar." "I doubt our paths have crossed," Dominic said smoothly. "Eleanor, darling," Margaret interrupted, her voice sticky sweet in a way that meant she was about to say something cruel. "Where on earth did you meet Mr. Kane? I hope you haven't been exaggerating your circumstances to attract his attention." Heat flooded Elena's cheeks. The implication was clear, that Elena had somehow tricked Dominic into being here, that a man like him could never genuinely be interested in someone like her. "Actually," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a tone that made the air in the room seem to thicken, "Elena has been far too modest about herself. I've never met anyone more genuine, more worthy of protection." The word protection hit the room like a physical force. Margaret stepped back involuntarily, and Claire's eyes went wide. There was something in Dominic's voice now, something ancient and commanding that made Elena's pulse skip. "How wonderful," Margaret managed weakly. "Indeed." Dominic's arm came around Elena's waist, pulling her against his side. "If you'll excuse us, we should head down to the ceremony." Claire and Margaret left without another word, and Elena sagged against Dominic the moment the door closed behind them. "Thank you," she whispered. "They always make me feel like—" "Like you're not enough," Dominic finished quietly. "But you are, Elena. You're everything." The words hit her like a physical blow. Elena looked up at him, at this impossible man who had walked into her life and turned everything upside down, and felt something crack open in her chest. "Dominic!" she started, but he was already moving, his hands coming up to frame her face with devastating gentleness. "The ceremony," he said, though his amber eyes had gone dark with something that made Eleanor's breath catch. "Right," she whispered, "the ceremony." But neither of them moved. The wedding ceremony took place in the resort's rose garden, and Elena spent the entire time acutely aware of Dominic beside her. His presence was like a shield against the curious stares and whispered comments, and when Marcus's voice rang out across the garden, promising to love and honour Sarah forever, Eleanor felt nothing but relief. She was free. The realization hit her as the newly married couple kissed and the crowd erupted in applause. She was free of Marcus, free of the version of herself that had settled for scraps of affection, free of the belief that she wasn't worth fighting for. "You're smiling," Dominic observed as they stood and began moving toward the reception. "I am," Elena said, surprised. "I really am." They were halfway across the garden when Marcus intercepted them. Elena's ex-husband looked exactly the same as he had 6 months ago, pleasant and forgettable and utterly ordinary in his black tuxedo, but standing next to Dominic, he seemed smaller somehow, diminished. "Elena," Marcus said, his smile wide and false. "You look, well, really well." "Thank you," Elena replied politely. "Congratulations on your wedding." Marcus's gaze shifted to Dominic, and Eleanor caught the exact moment when masculine instinct kicked in. Marcus straightened slightly, his chest puffing out in a display that would have been laughable if Eleanor hadn't been so nervous. "I don't believe we've met," Marcus said, extending his hand. "Marcus Reed?" Dominic looked at the offered hand for a long moment before taking it. The handshake lasted exactly 3 seconds, but Elena saw Marcus wince slightly when it ended. "Dominic," he said simply, "and you're Elena's?" "Mine," Dominic said, the word carrying enough quiet authority to make Marcus take a step back. Elena felt heat flood her body at the possessive declaration. "Mine. Not boyfriend, not date, not pretend anything. Mine." "Right," Marcus said weakly. "Well, Elena, I hope you'll save me a dance later, for old time's sake." "She won't be available," Dominic said before Elena could respond. "For anything." The threat in his voice was so subtle that Elena almost missed it, but Marcus heard it loud and clear. Her ex-husband mumbled something about needing to find his bride and disappeared into the crowd. "That was intense," Elena said as they watched him go. "He touched what's mine," Dominic said simply, as if that explained everything. Elena's breath caught. "Dominic? Elena? Elena Winters?" The voice that interrupted them was loud and slightly slurred, belonging to a man Elena recognized as one of Marcus's college friends, Tom something. He was holding a champagne flute and swaying slightly on his feet. "Holy shit," Tom continued, oblivious to the way Dominic had gone very, very still beside her. "It is you. Marcus said you'd probably show up alone tonight, but damn girl, you really outdid yourself." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "Tom? I mean, we all thought you'd learned your lesson after Marcus traded up, but here you are with—" Tom's alcohol-addled brain finally processed exactly who was standing next to Eleanor, and his face went white. "Jesus Christ," he breathed. "You're Dominic Kane. You're the Alpha King of the Northern Territories." The words rang out across the garden like a gunshot. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. Elena felt the weight of 100 stares settling on them like physical pressure. Alpha King. The title that Dominic had told her in private that she'd been trying to process and understand was now public knowledge. Everyone at Marcus Reed's wedding reception now knew that Elena Winters, the same Elena who had been dumped and humiliated 6 months ago, was standing in a rose garden with shifter royalty. Elena's world tilted sideways. "Dominic," she whispered, but her voice was lost in the growing murmur of the crowd. He looked down at her, his amber eyes soft despite the chaos beginning to build around them. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly, as if they weren't surrounded by 200 wedding guests who were now staring at them with varying degrees of shock and calculation. Elena stared back at him. This beautiful, impossible man who had agreed to be her fake boyfriend was an Alpha King. Not just any alpha, but royalty. The kind of person who appeared in newspapers and political discussions and probably had his own security detail. And he was here, with her, looking at her like she was the only person who mattered. "Elena?" Dominic's voice was gentle, patient. "Talk to me." Around them, the whispers were growing louder. She could hear fragments of conversation. Alpha King, Northern Territories, Eleanor Winters. How did she? What's he doing? Eleanor took a shaky breath and made her choice. I'm okay, she said, and stepped closer to him instead of away. I'm okay. Dominic's smile was like sunrise. Good, he said, offering her his arm. Because I believe they're serving dinner, and I'd like to dance with my queen before the night is over. My queen? Elena slipped her hand through his arm and let him lead her toward the reception tent, where Marcus and Sarah were greeting their guests and trying very hard not to stare at the Alpha King who had just claimed Elena Winters in front of everyone. She was still terrified, still overwhelmed, still convinced that this was all too good to be true. But for the first time in her life, Elena felt like she might actually deserve something beautiful. The reception tent was a masterpiece of white silk and twinkling lights, but Eleanor barely saw any of it. All she could focus on was the way conversations stopped when they passed, the way people stared and whispered and tried to pretend they weren't cataloguing every detail of her appearance. Alpha King. The words followed them like a shadow as Dominic led her to their assigned table. Elena's hands shook as she smoothed her midnight blue dress, and she was grateful when Dominic pulled out her chair with the kind of old-world courtesy that gave her something to focus on besides the weight of 100 curious stares. Breathe, he murmured as he settled into the seat beside her, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. Just breathe. This is insane, Eleanor whispered back. You're an Alpha King. What are you doing here with me? Dominic's amber eyes found hers across the small table, and the intensity in them made her heart skip. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Before Elena could ask what he meant, the lights dimmed, and Marcus took the microphone for his welcome speech. Elena tried to focus on his words. Something about love and destiny and finding your perfect match. But all she could think about was the impossible man sitting beside her. An Alpha King. She was at her ex-boyfriend's wedding with shifter royalty, and he was looking at her like she was precious. Elena. She turned to find Dominic watching her with concern. You're thinking too loud, he said softly. What's wrong? Everything, Elena wanted to say. This whole situation was wrong. She was a nobody, a junior marketing coordinator who lived in a studio apartment and drove a 10-year-old Honda. She wasn't the kind of woman who attracted Alpha Kings. She wasn't special enough or beautiful enough or important enough for any of this to make sense. I don't understand why you're here, she said instead, with me. Dominic was quiet for a long moment, his gaze searching her face. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. What do you know about fated mates? He asked. Elena blinked. What? Fated mates, he repeated. In my world, every shifter has one perfect match, one person who completes them. The bond is undeniable. The golden warmth in Elena's chest pulsed, and suddenly she understood exactly what he was trying to tell her. The fire that had shot up her arm when they touched, the invisible thread that seemed to connect them, the way she felt safe and cherished and utterly seen whenever he looked at her. You're saying I'm your... She couldn't finish the sentence. Yes, Dominic said simply. Eleanor stared at him. Fated mates. The concept should have sounded like something out of a fantasy novel, but sitting there in the soft light of the reception tent, feeling the pull of whatever existed between them, it felt like the only thing that made sense. It also felt like the most terrifying thing she'd ever heard. I can't be, she whispered. Dominic, look around. Look at these people. Look at this place. I don't belong in your world. You belong with me, he said firmly. That's all that matters. But it wasn't all that mattered, and they both knew it. Eleanor could see the future stretching out before them, the scrutiny, the expectations, the way she would be judged and found wanting by everyone in his life. She would be the ordinary human who had somehow snared an Alpha King, the nobody who didn't deserve what she'd been given. I need some air, she said, pushing back from the table. Dominic started to rise with her, but Elena shook her head. Please, just give me a minute." She made her way out of the tent and into the resort's gardens, grateful for the cool night air against her heated skin. The music and laughter from the reception faded as she walked deeper into the manicured landscape, following a winding path that led to a small gazebo overlooking the lake. Elena sank onto one of the wooden benches and tried to make sense of everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. Yesterday she had been alone and humiliated, facing the prospect of attending Marcus's wedding without a date. Now she was apparently the fated mate of an alpha king, and she had no idea how to process any of it. "Running away already?" Elena's blood turned to ice. She knew that voice, had heard it whisper sweet lies and cruel truths for 2 years of her life. Marcus stood at the entrance to the gazebo, his bow tie loosened and his hair dishevelled. He was holding a tumbler of what looked like whiskey, and his eyes had the bright, dangerous gleam of a man who had been drinking just enough to say things he shouldn't. "Marcus," Elena said carefully, rising from the bench, "shouldn't you be with your wife?" "Sarah's busy playing princess with her bridesmaids," Marcus said, stepping into the gazebo. The space suddenly felt much smaller. "Besides, I wanted to talk to you, alone." Elena's instincts prickled with warning. "We don't have anything to talk about." "Don't we?" Marcus moved closer, and Elena caught the sharp scent of alcohol on his breath. "Come on, Elena, it's me. You can drop the act." "What act?" Marcus laughed, but there was no humour in it. "The act where you pretend that Dominic Kane, the alpha king of the fucking Northern Territories, is actually interested in you." Each word hit Elena like a physical blow. "Marcus, you're drunk." "I'm drunk enough to tell you the truth," he interrupted, setting his glass down on the gazebo's railing with more force than necessary. "You think I don't know what this is? You're embarrassed about showing up alone, so you hired an escort, a really, really expensive escort." "That's not—" "What else would it be?" Marcus's voice was getting louder now, more aggressive. "Elena, be realistic. You're a nobody. You work in marketing for a mid-tier consulting firm. You live in a studio apartment, and 6 months ago you were crying over me. Now suddenly you're dating shifter royalty. Come on." Elena felt tears prick at her eyes, but she lifted her chin defiantly. "You don't know anything about my life." "I know everything about your life," Marcus shot back. "I know you're desperate and pathetic and so starved for attention that you'd pay someone to pretend to care about you, just like you always were." The words landed like physical blows, each one designed to find the soft spots in Elena's armour. Because Marcus did know her. He knew exactly which insecurities to target, exactly how to make her feel small and worthless and utterly alone. "Stop," Elena whispered. "Poor little Elena," Marcus continued, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Still trying to convince everyone she's worth something, still believing her own delusions." "I said stop." Elena's voice was stronger now, but Marcus wasn't listening. "How much are you paying him?" Marcus stepped closer, backing Elena toward the gazebo's railing. "Whatever it is, it's too much. No one's going to believe that someone like Dominic Kane would actually choose someone like you." Elena wanted to run. Every instinct she had developed over years of emotional abuse was screaming at her to get away, to escape before Marcus could do any more damage. But she was trapped between him and the railing, and he was close enough now that she could see the cruel satisfaction in his eyes. "You're pathetic," he said quietly, reaching out to grab her arm. "You've always been pathetic, and paying some guy to pretend to love you just proves—" His hand closed around her wrist, hard enough to bruise, and something inside Eleanor snapped. "Let go of me," she said, her voice deadly quiet. Marcus laughed. "Or what? You'll call your fake boyfriend?" But even as he spoke, his grip loosened slightly, because something had changed in the air around them, something that made the hair on the back of Elena's neck stand up and sent a primal warning racing down her spine. Dominic stepped out of the shadows like an avenging angel. Elena had never seen him truly angry before. In the coffee shop, at the boutique, even when dealing with her family, he had been controlled, patient, utterly composed. But the man who emerged from the garden path was none of those things. He was terrifying. Power radiated from him in waves, ancient and absolute and barely leashed. His amber eyes had gone golden, almost glowing in the soft light from the gazebo, and when he looked at Marcus, Elena saw her ex-boyfriend go white with instinctive fear. "Take your hand off my mate," Dominic said, his voice so quiet it was almost a whisper. But there was something underneath the words, something that spoke of dominance and territory and consequences that Marcus's human brain couldn't fully process, but his survival instincts understood perfectly. Marcus dropped Elena's wrist like it had burned him. "I was just—" he started, but Dominic cut him off with a look that could have melted steel. "You were just leaving," Dominic said, still quiet, still deadly. "And you will never speak to Elena again. You will never touch her again. You will never even look at her again. Are we clear?" Marcus nodded frantically, already backing toward the gazebo's exit. Yes, we're clear." "Good." Dominic's smile was all teeth. "Now get out of my sight before I decide that embarrassing you in front of your wedding guests isn't enough of a consequence." Marcus fled. The moment he was gone, Dominic's entire demeanour shifted. The terrifying Alpha King disappeared, replaced by the gentle man who had spent the past day treating Elena like she was made of something precious. "Are you hurt?" he asked, crossing to her in 2 quick strides. His hands were already reaching for her, checking her wrist where Marcus had grabbed her, his touch infinitely careful. "I'm fine," Elena said, but her voice was shaking. "I'm fine." Dominic's jaw tightened as he examined the red marks on her skin. "He hurt you." "Dominic, it's okay." "It's not okay," he said fiercely, his golden eyes meeting hers. "It will never be okay for someone to hurt you, not while I'm breathing." Eleanor stared at him, this beautiful, impossible man who had appeared out of nowhere and turned her entire world upside down. This Alpha King who looked at her like she was his greatest treasure and defended her like she was worth defending. "Why?" she whispered. Dominic's hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs brushing away tears she didn't realize had fallen. "Because you're mine," he said simply. "Because you're everything I've been searching for. Because the moment I saw you, I knew I would spend the rest of my life protecting you." Eleanor felt something break open in her chest. Something that had been locked away since Marcus, since her family, since every person who had ever made her feel like she wasn't enough. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I know," Dominic said gently, "but you don't have to be scared alone anymore." Eleanor looked into his amber eyes and saw her future there. Complicated, yes. Terrifying, absolutely. But also filled with a love so fierce and protective that it took her breath away. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay?" Eleanor stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, close enough that the golden thread between them hummed with contentment. "Okay," she repeated, and meant it. "I'm yours." Dominic's smile was like sunrise. "And I'm yours," he promised. "Always." When he kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promises, neither of them could have imagined 24 hours ago, Eleanor finally understood what it felt like to come home. Elena and Dominic walked back into the reception tent hand in hand, and she felt the shift in the room immediately. The kiss in the gazebo had changed something fundamental between them, and now the golden thread that connected them hummed with certainty instead of questions. She was his. He was hers. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The band was playing something soft and romantic as couples swayed on the dance floor. Eleanor spotted Marcus near the bar, pointedly avoiding their direction, his face still pale from his encounter with an Alpha King's fury. Good. Let him remember what it felt like to face real consequences for once in his privileged life. "Dance with me," Dominic murmured, leading her toward the centre of the room. Eleanor went willingly, letting him pull her into his arms as the music wrapped around them. She had never been much of a dancer, but with Dominic it felt effortless, natural, like they had been moving together for years instead of hours. "You're quiet," he observed, his hand warm and steady against the small of her back. "I'm thinking," Elena said, looking up into those impossible amber eyes, "about what happens next. What do you want to happen next?" The question caught her off guard. For so long, Elena had been focused on just surviving, getting through Marcus's wedding, getting through the humiliation, getting through another day of feeling like she wasn't enough. She hadn't allowed herself to think about what she actually wanted. "I want to go home with you," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I want to see your world. I want to learn what it means to be your mate." Dominic's smile was devastating. "Then that's what we'll do." They swayed together in comfortable silence, and Elena let herself imagine it. A life where she was cherished instead of tolerated, protected instead of abandoned, chosen instead of settled for. It seemed too good to be true, but the steady warmth of Dominic's presence made it feel possible. That was when she heard her sister's voice, sharp and carrying across the dance floor. "I still can't believe it," Claire was saying to a small group of wedding guests, her tone pitched just loud enough to ensure Elena could hear every word. Elena, of all people, somehow managing to trick an Alpha King into playing along with her desperate little fantasy. Elena's steps faltered, but Dominic's arms tightened around her, keeping her steady. "She's probably paying him," another voice chimed in. One of Marcus's cousins, Elena thought. "I mean, look at her. What else would explain it?" "Oh, absolutely," Claire agreed, warming to her theme. Poor little Elena, so pathetic she has to buy a date for her ex-boyfriend's wedding. And then she picks someone so obviously out of her league that everyone can see right through the charade. Elena felt heat flood her cheeks. Around them, other couples were pretending to dance while straining to hear every cruel word. The whispers were starting again, spreading through the room like wildfire. Fake, paid escort, desperate, pathetic. "Elena," Dominic said quietly, his voice cutting through the noise, "look at me." But Elena couldn't. She was drowning in shame and humiliation, in the certainty that everyone in this room was seeing exactly what Claire wanted them to see. A nobody who was so starved for attention that she'd create an elaborate lie just to avoid facing the truth about herself. "She's not wrong," Elena whispered, pulling back from Dominic's embrace. "Everyone's thinking it. I don't belong with you. This whole thing is—" "The truth," Dominic said firmly, his hands coming up to frame her face right there in the middle of the dance floor. "This is the truth, Eleanor. You and me, what we have." But Eleanor could feel the eyes on them, could hear the whispers growing louder. Her mother had joined Claire now, their voices a chorus of criticism and doubt. "Really, Elena always was prone to delusions of grandeur," Margaret was saying. "Remember when she thought Marcus actually loved her?" "Some people never learn," Claire added with false sympathy. "They keep reaching for things that are so clearly beyond them." That was when Elena saw Marcus approaching, emboldened by alcohol and the crowd of people eager to watch her humiliation. His earlier fear of Dominic seemed to have evaporated, replaced by the familiar smugness that had made Elena feel small for 2 years. "Elena," Marcus called out, loud enough for half the reception to hear. "Come on, enough with the games. We all know what's really going on here." The music stopped. Elena felt the weight of 200 stares settling on her like physical pressure. Every conversation in the tent had ceased. Every eye was focused on the drama unfolding in the centre of the dance floor. "Marcus," she said quietly, don't what? Tell the truth." Marcus stepped closer, playing to his audience. "Everyone's being too polite to say it, but we're all thinking the same thing. There's no way Dominic Kane, the Alpha King of the Northern Territories, would actually be interested in someone like you. So what is this really? How much did you pay him?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Elena could feel Dominic go very still beside her, could sense the dangerous shift in his energy that meant he was about to do something that would change everything. "Actually," came a new voice, cutting through the tension like a blade. Elena turned to see a woman approaching from the edge of the tent, tall and elegant, with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded immediate attention. She moved with the fluid grace of a predator, and when she spoke, every person in the room listened. "I can answer that question," the woman continued, her voice carrying easily across the silent crowd, "because I know exactly why Alpha King Dominic Kane is here tonight." Elena's heart stopped. This was it, the moment when everything fell apart, when whatever beautiful dream she'd been living came crashing down around her. The woman stopped directly in front of them and smiled. It was not a kind smile. "He's here," she said, her voice ringing with authority, "because Elena Winters is his fated mate, his queen, the future Luna of the Northern Territories." The silence that followed was deafening. Elena stared at the stranger in shock. Who was she? How did she know about fated mates? And why was she defending Elena when they'd never even met? "Evelyn," Dominic said quietly, and Elena caught the warning in his voice. Evelyn. The name meant nothing to Elena, but apparently it meant something to everyone else. She could see recognition dawning on faces around the room, could feel the shift as people realized they were in the presence of someone important. "Your Majesty," Evelyn said with a slight incline of her head toward Dominic. Then she turned to Eleanor, and her expression softened just a fraction. "Luna." Luna. The word hit Eleanor like a physical blow. She wasn't just Dominic's mate, she was going to be a queen. The realization should have been terrifying, but standing there in front of 200 wedding guests who had been ready to watch her humiliation, Eleanor felt something else entirely. Power. Marcus started, but Evelyn cut him off with a look that could have frozen hell. "You what?" she asked sweetly. "You thought you could publicly humiliate the future queen of the Northern Territories at your little human wedding? How interesting." Marcus went white. Around them, Elena could hear the shocked whispers starting again, but this time they carried a very different tone. Awe instead of mockery, fear instead of amusement. Elena looked around the room at all the faces that had been so eager to watch her fail. Her mother, pale and stricken. Claire, for once in her life, rendered speechless. Marcus's wedding guests, suddenly realizing they had just witnessed something far beyond their understanding. And then Dominic stepped forward. "You want to know the truth?" he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the tent. "The truth is that Eleanor Winters is the strongest, kindest, most beautiful woman I have ever met. The truth is that I would burn down kingdoms for her. The truth is that she is my mate, my queen, my everything." He turned to face the crowd fully, and Eleanor saw the exact moment when his careful human facade dropped away. The Alpha King stood before them in all his terrifying glory, ancient, powerful, absolutely untouchable. "The truth," he continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried perfectly, "is that anyone who disrespects her disrespects me. Anyone who hurts her answers to me. Anyone who makes her feel less than the extraordinary woman she is will learn exactly why I am called king." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Elena could feel the fear radiating from the crowd, could see people taking unconscious steps backward. But Dominic wasn't finished. He turned back to Elena and dropped to one knee right there in the middle of the dance floor. Elena's breath caught in her throat. "Elena Winters," he said, his voice gentling but still carrying to every corner of the tent. "Will you do me the honour of becoming my wife, my queen, my partner in all things?" From his jacket pocket he produced a ring that caught the light like captured starfire. A diamond surrounded by sapphires, the exact colour of Elena's dress, set in platinum that seemed to glow with its own inner light. Elena stared down at him. This impossible man who had walked into her life 24 hours ago and turned everything upside down. This Alpha King who looked at her like she hung the stars. This beautiful, patient, fierce protector who was offering her not just love, but a crown. Around them, the silence was absolute. Elena thought about Marcus, who had made her feel small and grateful for scraps. She thought about her family, who had spent years convincing her she wasn't worth fighting for. She thought about all the people in this room who had been so eager to watch her fail. And then she looked into Dominic's amber eyes and saw her future there. "Yes," she said, and her voice rang clear across the silent tent. "Yes, I'll marry you." The smile that spread across Dominic's face was radiant. He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, as if it had been made for her, and rose to his feet in one fluid motion. And then he kissed her. It wasn't the gentle, sweet kiss from the gazebo. This was acclaiming, fierce and possessive, and utterly consuming. Elena melted into him, her arms winding around his neck as he lifted her off her feet and spun her around. When they finally broke apart, breathless and glowing, the tent erupted. Not in the polite applause Elena might have expected, but in something deeper, something that spoke of recognition and awe and the primal understanding that they had just witnessed something extraordinary. The Alpha King had claimed his queen. Elena looked out at the crowd, at Marcus, pale and shaken, at her family, stunned into silence, at 200 wedding guests who would spend the rest of their lives telling the story of the night Elena Winters became royalty. She had come to this wedding expecting humiliation. Instead, she had found her destiny. Dominic's arm came around her waist, pulling her close, and Elena felt the golden thread between them settle into perfect harmony. She was home. Elena woke up in Dominic's arms as golden sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their suite, and for the first time in her adult life she felt completely at peace. The engagement ring on her finger caught the morning light, sending rainbow prisms dancing across the white silk sheets. Elena twisted it gently, still marvelling at its weight, at the reality of what had happened the night before. She was engaged to an Alpha King. "Good morning, my queen," Dominic murmured against her hair, his voice rough with sleep and contentment. Elena turned in his arms to face him, struck once again by how beautiful he was. In the soft morning light, with his dark hair mussed and his amber eyes warm with love, he looked less like the terrifying Alpha King who had claimed her publicly, and more like the gentle man who had agreed to be her pretend boyfriend in a coffee shop. "Good morning," she whispered back, then paused. "What happens now?" Dominic's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "Now you come home with me. You meet my pack. You learn what it means to be Luna." Luna. The title still felt foreign on her tongue, but Elena was beginning to understand that it meant more than just being Dominic's mate. It meant having a purpose, a place where she belonged, people who would look to her for guidance and protection. "Are you ready for that?" Dominic asked gently. Elena considered the question. Was she ready to leave behind her small, safe life for something extraordinary and terrifying? Was she ready to be a queen? "I'm ready to try," she said finally. Dominic's smile was like sunrise. "That's all I need." The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation and revelation. Eleanor gave her notice at work, packed her few belongings, and said goodbye to her studio apartment without a single regret. The life she was leaving behind had been small and lonely, and marked by the constant ache of feeling like she wasn't enough. The life she was stepping into promised to be everything she had never dared to dream. Dominic's territory was a 3-hour drive north of the city, deep in the mountains where ancient forests stretched as far as the eye could see. Elena had expected something rustic, maybe a collection of cabins or a lodge. What she found was a palace. It rose from the mountainside like something out of a fairy tale, all soaring towers and graceful arches, with gardens that cascaded down the slopes in terraced waves of colour. But it wasn't the grandeur that took Elena's breath away. It was the way it felt like coming home. "Welcome to Shadowhaven," Dominic said, as they pulled through the massive iron gates. "You're home." Elena's home. The pack members who came to greet them were nothing like Elena had expected. There was no judgment in their eyes, no scepticism about the human woman who had captured their Alpha King's heart. Instead, there was warmth, welcome, joy that their leader had finally found his mate. "Luna," they called her, and each time Eleanor heard the title, it felt a little more natural. The weeks that followed were filled with learning and growing and slowly becoming the woman Eleanor was meant to be. She discovered that being Luna meant more than just standing beside Dominic. It meant being a mother to the pack, a protector and nurturer and fierce defender of those under her care. She learned to settle disputes between pack members, to offer comfort to those who were grieving, to celebrate with those who found joy. She learned that her empathy and kindness, the very qualities that her family had seen as weaknesses, were exactly what made her perfect for this role. And through it all, Dominic was there, patient when she stumbled, proud when she succeeded, utterly devoted to helping her become everything she was capable of being. "You're incredible," he told her one evening as they walked through the gardens, Elena's hand in his. "I knew you were perfect for this, but watching you with the pack... Elena, you're exactly the Luna they needed." Elena felt warmth bloom in her chest, not the golden fire of their mate bond, but something deeper, the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had found her purpose. "I love them," she said simply. "I love this life. I love you." Dominic stopped walking and pulled her into his arms. "And I love you, more than I thought it was possible to love another person." When he kissed her there in the moonlit garden, surrounded by the sounds of the pack celebrating in the distance, Elena felt the last pieces of her old life fall away. The scared, lonely woman who had asked a stranger to be her fake boyfriend was gone, replaced by someone confident and cherished and utterly at home in her own skin. 3 months later, Eleanor stood in the same garden, wearing a gown that seemed to be made of starlight, watching as what felt like half the supernatural world gathered to witness her official claiming ceremony. Pack members from every territory had come to honour their new Luna, and Elena felt their love and acceptance wash over her in waves. Her family had been invited, of course. Elena had extended the olive branch because it was the right thing to do, but she was no longer the desperate daughter seeking their approval. When her mother had tried to criticise the ceremony's pagan elements, and Claire had made snide comments about Elena putting on airs, Elena had simply smiled and changed the subject. She didn't need their validation anymore. She had found her real family. "Ready?" Dominic asked, appearing at her side in a black suit that made him look like a dark prince. "Ready," Elena said, and meant it completely. The ceremony was beautiful in its simplicity. No elaborate vows or complicated rituals, just Elena and Dominic standing before their pack and promising to love and protect each other for the rest of their lives. When Dominic placed the Luna's crown on her head, a delicate circlet of silver and sapphires that had belonged to Luna Queens for generations, Eleanor felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like a mantle. It was a good weight, a welcome weight. "By the authority of the Northern Territories," the pack's elder intoned, "I present to you Alpha King Dominic Kane and Luna Queen Elena Kane." Elena Kane. The name fit like it had been made for her. As the pack erupted in celebration, Dominic pulled Elena into his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing with pure joy. When he set her down, Elena caught sight of Marcus in the crowd of guests, his face pale with the realization of what Elena had become. She felt nothing but pity for him. He had had something precious and thrown it away, too small-minded to recognize its value, his loss. "What are you thinking about?" Dominic asked, following her gaze. How grateful I am that he broke my heart, Elena said honestly. If he hadn't, I never would have needed a fake boyfriend. I never would have met you. Dominic's smile was devastating. His loss was my greatest gain. They danced until the stars came out, surrounded by pack members who had become Eleanor's chosen family. As the celebration wound down, Eleanor and Dominic found themselves alone on the terrace, looking out over their territory bathed in moonlight. "Do you ever miss it?" Dominic asked quietly. "Your old life?" Elena considered the question seriously. Did she miss the cramped apartment and the soul-crushing job and the family who made her feel small? Did she miss feeling invisible and unimportant and utterly alone? "No," she said finally, "I don't miss a single thing about who I used to be." "Not even the quiet, the simplicity?" Elena laughed. "Dominic, my life was never quiet. It was just filled with the wrong kind of noise, fear and doubt, and the constant ache of feeling like I didn't belong anywhere." She turned in his arms to face him fully. "Now I have real noise, laughter and love and the sounds of a pack that needs me. I have purpose. I have you." Dominic's amber eyes were soft in the moonlight. "And I have you, my queen, my everything." When he kissed her, Elena tasted forever on his lips. This was her life now, filled with love and purpose and the certain knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged. The scared woman who had begged a stranger to be her fake boyfriend felt like a character from someone else's story. This was Elena's story, Elena's life, Elena's happily ever after, and it was perfect. As they stood there on the terrace of their mountain palace, holding each other close while their packs celebrated in the distance, Eleanor marvelled at how much her life had changed. 24 hours ago, or was it a lifetime, she had been nobody special, just another lonely heart trying to survive her ex-boyfriend's wedding. Now she was a queen, and she had never been happier. Where are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. I love hearing your thoughts about Elena and Dominic's journey from that desperate moment in the coffee shop to their happily ever after. If you'd like to support me, please subscribe. It's free and it helps more people discover these stories of love, fate, and finding where you truly belong.